It is No Pucks Given for Monday, November 25th. I am Dan Kingerski. On all of the National Hockey Now and Pittsburgh Hockey Now platforms, you'll find the show on Amazon, YouTube, Apple, Spotify. I think that's everywhere. If you need it somewhere else, just let me know. So I'm glad I am releasing this podcast Monday afternoon, not Monday morning. I ripped a pretty good one Monday morning. I'm not going to lie. It felt pretty good. I had the cadence and the rhythm going, and I was really on point. And I held it back for just a few minutes because, one, I made a small mistake on who scored for Utah in Saturday, and I didn't feel like people correcting me because you would have, and you would have been right. But also, I'm happy that I held it back because Monday has had a few events that have changed the tenor and tone of the podcast that I did Monday morning. So here's what's on this week's, or actually today's No Pucks Given. I try to do a couple or a few per week. We're going to get more into Mike Sullivan's future. I wrote a bit of a barn burner column on, losing my voice too. I wrote a barn burner column Sunday afternoon, the title of which is "It's Sullivan or Big Moves, Something Has to Give." We'll get into that, of what exactly has to give and why, and should it be Sullivan? Can Sullivan be rescued at this point? We'll get into all of that. Some of the changes, however, a little bit of irony, as Monday afternoon after practice, the Penguins reassigned Sam Poulin back to Wilkes-Barre Scranton. Okay, kind of expected. I know some of you will kind of get uptight and say, see, Sullivan hates young players. I thought Poulin played much better in this 6-game stint than he had in his previous 6 NHL games to date. But did he make an impact? Was he anything more than just a guy out there? If you don't do it in the first 6 games, when that adrenaline wears off, then things regress. The Penguins made the move. Now, what's a little bit ironic about Monday afternoon is then the Penguins make a trade. Kind of a minor trade, but it could be a little bigger for them down the road. The Penguins give up a 2027 fourth-round pick in exchange for Philip Tomasino from the Nashville Predators. Tomasino was also a 2019 first-round pick, just like Poulin. Poulin was 21st overall. Tomasino was 24th. So nothing really important in that connection, but it is kind of interesting. Demote one, spend a fourth-rounder to acquire another one. Tomasino, a right wing, kind of slight, skates well, not afraid to go to the net, but still hasn't really picked up much in the way of results in his NHL career. He's played 159 games since 21-22 when he made his NHL debut. Has 71 points, 23 goals. He split last season between Milwaukee of the AHL and Nashville. So he's not really a bona fide NHL player yet. He has 1 assist in 11 games this season. So don't expect 20 goals out of him. I believe he'll just simply take the third line right wing spot. I think if he's available tomorrow, or actually rather on Wednesday, which he certainly should be, he'll just take that third line right wing spot. If the Penguins keep Puljujarvi, O'Connor, and that right wing together, there were some changes at practice. So we'll get into the changes at practice as well in the podcast. And also, I had a little bit of a long talk with Alex Nedeljkovic on Monday. Some of it will stay off the record, but I think I can appropriately convey the sentiment, the contents of large parts of the conversation. So we're going to do that as well. In fact, let's start with Nedeljkovic because I think that's an important building block to get to Mike Sullivan. And one of the things that Nedeljkovic and I talked about on Monday were his comments after the game Saturday night. He was a little hesitant. He's like, I went back and read it, and I watched the video. He most likely watched our video because it's at 16 or 17,000 views on YouTube already, and it's going a little bit viral. So he's probably watching our video, and he really believe this. He watched it back a couple of times. He was reading the words and, okay, should I have said it this way? He was genuinely interested in conveying a message to the media, for the fans. He wanted to educate us and kind of have that communication. And that's why he popped off a little bit Saturday. He was a little bit worried that it came off like accusatory or something. And I assured him, no, that actually, I believe you, the fans, I believe you felt seen, validated, your frustrations, empathized through Nedeljkovic's comments. And that's what I conveyed to him. I said, no, I think the fans kind of needed, a little bit of that. And he certainly didn't point fingers. Here's the comments from Saturday.
I don't know. That's the only way I move on. It sucks. This sucks. I mean, I don't know. The only other way I can maybe say is, like, if we want to stop feeling like this after games, you want to stop getting embarrassed at home, like, do something about it. I don't know. We pay a price. Do something. Feel something else. Like, anything else. Feels better than whatever that was tonight and what we've been kind of putting out there as a whole this year. So we've had good efforts lately. The game was right there. It was within striking distance, and then we just kind of, I don't know, the third period just wasn't it. So, but we can't let it unravel like that.
We'll cut it there. I think that's you get the gist of it. Okay, so let's springboard that into the Mike Sullivan conversation. And I went as far as I wanted to go. I'm not going to call for Mike Sullivan's head because I think it's far more complicated. And I think the situation is much bigger than just the general manager and coach. This is an organization decision, an organization and a cultural thing the Penguins are dealing with. It also goes all the way up to the top of FSG, Fenway Sports Group. I must tell you, after sitting in on Sullivan's daily press conference on Monday, I don't think Sullivan is going anywhere. Based on the practice that he had, based on just his comments. When a coach is feeling like he's twisting in the wind, you can always pick up a comment here or there or a sloppy phrasing. And make no mistake, Sullivan had a couple of sloppy phrases last March. And I know for certain, I believe the people in our universe, whom we have in common, when they kind of gave me an acknowledging nod that he heard he heard the whispers, or he felt the heat last March before the Penguins sort of kicked it in. So you hear Nedeljkovic's comments, and then sitting in on Sullivan's press conference, I didn't get any sense whatsoever there was any heat on Sullivan. He is genuinely kind of going back to square one. He's starting from scratch, really. Monday's practice was physical, but it was upbeat. He wasn't yelling at players. He was yelling to players. He wasn't, grousing or pounding his stick. He was encouraging. I'm sure you have some emotions and reactions when I say that. You want them bag skated, quite frankly. I wrote that team should be bag skated. Line them up on the goal line and go. No puck at practice. Sullivan's going a different route. And after practice, the coaches left at the practice started at say 11 o'clock. Coaches left around 11:50, 11:45. And Sidney Crosby kind of ran what came next, which was a shootout tournament. I'm not sure of the rules. Crosby and a couple of the veterans were making them up as they went along, and they were figuring it out. It was no mustache boy shootout, but they were just goofing around, having some fun. And believe it or not, the bottom sixers and the spare defensemen beat the top sixers, and the top four, the yellow jerseys, beat the black jerseys, and they went nuts on the ice. Okay. If that's what Sullivan feels like, to take some weight off, if he feels that's the way to go, obviously that's going to be on him. That's his sword that he will live or die by. That doesn't change what comes next. The Penguins, they actually have to start winning some games here. Or Kyle Dubas has to start making some real changes, because that negativity, that depression, that dispirited locker room that I walked into on Saturday night, that I walked into on Friday night, that can't continue. Not just because losses. And I'm going to challenge a lot of you to think in a 3D model here, because there are a lot of facets and dimensions to this situation. Now, I read a lot of comments. Oh, this is good. We want them to lose so they get a higher draft pick. There's some truth to that, but there's also some falsehood or some incorrectness to that. And that's part and parcel to wrapping your arms around everything that's going on, because clearly the Penguins are in transition. That's on one level. Another level is fans aren't happy. 15,000 showed up on Friday night. Not exactly like a Tuesday night, right? It wasn't a school night. 15,000 people showed up. Actually, let me rephrase that. They sold 15,000 tickets for Friday. 15,000 people did not show up. There were probably 12 or 13,000 in the building. It was, I posted the pictures, I wrote about it. It was not a pleasant looking experience. Large swaths of open seats. I don't know that I've seen that in a long, long time. Some of the sections looked like a COVID section. I kid you not. That's something to keep an eye on, because that's money. That's revenue. What do you think Fenway Sports Group pays the most attention to? Money. Put that brick in the wall. Here's something I don't think a lot of people are considering, because this is something you want. So I'm going to kind of tell you how you get what you want here a little bit. Play the young players, right? Play the young players, play the young players, play the young players. Well, you don't want to take a young player and drop them into a vat of acid. You don't want to drop them into a negative situation where bad habits are breeding, where players are miserable. You don't want their first NHL experience and some of their perceptions and some of what they learn in terms of work habits and all of those things to be affected, because the NHL veterans have lost their faith in the current team. I mean, I can go back through numerous examples of the last 25 years. Teams that were on the way, never came close, because when they had the kids, they tried to pour them into a bad situation. Just think of how many first overall picks and top 5 picks that the Edmonton Oilers had over a decade from the time that they went to the Stanley Cup final until they got McDavid. They owned the draft lottery, basically. And they still were in a draft lottery position in 2015 to get McDavid. And after McDavid, too, as I recall. The Ottawa Senators have been fighting this same uphill battle for 8 years. Tons of talented players, young players. And as soon as they haven't had a good situation to plug them in where those players can be successful in a positive environment. To wit, I'm going to tell you about me and Owen Pickering. All right, I'm going to give you kind of a little bit of I'm going to pull the curtain back here. Saturday night, Pickering obviously has his first game playing with Chris Letang, kind of a high-profile game for him. Now, he and I kind of had a back and forth in both the rookie camp and preseason where I would ask him, so what do you think? And then he started asking me, what do you think? And we went back and forth like that. Well, so I saw him Saturday night after the game, and I said, well, so what did you think? I know that wasn't the result you guys wanted, but how do you feel? How was it playing on that top pairing like that? And he kind of just shook his head, and he's like, it's really tough to evaluate anything like that right now. Like the game was so bad. It's just really tough. And I certainly excused him from any further conversation. I wasn't going to pick at him or anything. No pun intended. That's what you don't want. You want these guys feeling good about themselves and their game and the team. You don't want that negativity and that confidence rattling where they wonder if they should be doing more, they blaming themselves, all of those things. You don't want that. And so even if Sullivan kind of has retrenched himself safely today, something has to give. A trade for Philip Tomasino is not exactly what I had in mind. That's not going to change or dramatically improve the team. Dubas, general manager Kyle Dubas, has to figure out a way to change his roster in some significant way. You can point to the blue line. Let's be honest here. The Penguins' blue line is probably the worst in the NHL. There's talent, don't get me wrong, but they're bad. Collectively, they're terrible. There have been too many instances, and this is actually where I screwed up the first recording of this podcast by just mixing and matching the goals from the Winnipeg game on Friday with the goals from Utah on Saturday. The Penguins were outscored 10-2 in those two games. We'll start, and I think this is probably the most glaring example of just lackadaisical attitude, lack of care, lack of urgency, far too casual. And that is a minute into the game, Marcus Pettersson is going back on a puck. He's under heavy forecheck pressure. You can see him look over to his defensive partner, Erik Karlsson, a couple of times. Pettersson's going to be on his backhand when he gets the puck. And he's looking over. What Karlsson needs to do is flip the hips, skate backwards, get ready to take the pass. Instead, Karlsson is skating forward, kind of just trailing the play or trailing the trailer who's after Pettersson. So Marcus Pettersson has only one option when he gets to the puck, somewhere in kind of the middle of the defensive zone. He just backhands it around the wall. Insiders call that the yellow. So he goes, around the baseboards there. Karlsson continues about his path, doesn't catch up to the puck kind of does, but doesn't really. Evgeny Malkin comes back into the defensive zone. So you would think at this point, right? What I'm describing, you would think this is complete safety. It was absolutely anything but, because Karlsson never really got to the puck. Malkin thinks he's going to touch it over to Karlsson, who's going forward, and Karlsson's going to, take the puck and go. Well, Malkin realizes that that's not really an option, so he muffs the first puck. Okay, it squibs towards the net. Malkin goes towards the net to retrieve the puck, but doesn't stop. He just kind of tries to loop around and get it in stride. Well, he muffs it again. At this point, Nino Niederreiter has the puck in front of the net with absolutely no Penguins within 20 feet. Of course he scored. He has Tristan Jarry completely at his mercy. And by the way, that little exchange on the ice led to a pretty testy exchange between Mike Sullivan and me after the game Friday night. Side note, I always laugh when some of you goofballs are like, you and Sullivan are buddies. Why won't you call for your buddy to be fired? You have no idea. You flat-brimmed simps have no idea what we go through on a daily basis. No, Sullivan and I aren't buddies. I certainly don't think we're enemies or anything, but he doesn't go out of his way to help the media. That's for sure. He's far more Bill Belichick than anything. Sullivan actually has been pretty good this season, but maybe I got a little too comfortable. So Friday night after the game, I don't know if you saw the post-game show. I asked Sullivan, I said, hey, I didn't say hey, but I said, Mike, that's 6 times this season that your team has allowed a goal on the first shot of the game. What are your thoughts? What do you think is a possible cause? Now, put a pin in that for a moment. I asked Tristan Jarry that same question in the locker room a few minutes before. Pretty close to Jarry's quote was, he said, we have to defend harder. We have to be ready to play in the first 5 minutes. I expected that kind of answer from Mike Sullivan, to which he did not give me that sort of an answer. I got the angry look that officials who miss a call get. I got the death stare as he kind of opened his palms, said, can you explain it? Can you explain it? I can't. And turned away from me. Fair enough. I was certainly the topic of conversation at the, in the media room on Saturday. That's for sure. And someone in the Penguins organization had an entirely different take. And trust me, I'm going to pull this back. I might be doing a Trump weave here. I'm going to pull it all back because it does all create a circle. I promise. Someone in the Penguins organization said, no, that wasn't you. He was stopping himself from ripping his players. That was the closest I've ever come to hearing him rip his own players. I was like, oh, that's an interesting take on the matter. So whether he didn't like my question, didn't like the situation, and or the unnamed source was correct, the goal was brutal. It shouldn't happen at any point in the season. And yet the Penguins seem to have a dozen of those this season. Erik Karlsson's effort has been an issue. Ryan Graves and Matt Grzelcyk were paired on Saturday night, so Pickering could play on the top pairing. Wouldn't you know it? Pretty early in the game, I think the third shot of the game, actually, Graves goes chasing the puck into the corner, and Grzelcyk wanders away from the front of the net. Now, neither of them actually covered anybody or pressured the puck to disrupt the play, and so Sidney Crosby was left between two wide-open players, Crosby's man and the man that Grzelcyk abandoned. Well, as soon as Sid saw the guy on the back door, he lunged and tried to break up the pass, but there was no way that was going to happen. And very quickly, it's 1-0 Utah. The fragile Penguins begin to think, here we go again. Because the defense let them down. The defense is, quite frankly, like as I said, one of the worst in the NHL, and that can't help. The players might not verbalize it even amongst themselves. It might be one of those elephants in the room that they don't want to talk about. That demoralizes a team. When you see them make a mistake that egregious, now you're down 1-0. Now you've got to fight back and try to find that goal. It gets exhausting mentally, physically, when you're always fighting uphill. And so maybe you exhale. It's just like a really bad goal, a soft goal. Everyone sort of exhales and is demoralized or discouraged for a moment. Now, because the Penguins have a dozen of those in tow, take that demoralization, multiply it by 12 or 15 or 20. They do have the worst goal differential in the NHL at minus 34, is it? Yeah, they're the worst. San Jose is second worst, minus 27. Think about that. The Penguins have 7-goal differential on San Jose. Now, let's bring it all home here, okay? I told you I was going to build the wall with brick at a time. Now we bring it all the way back to Sullivan and Dubas, wherein when they get into the game Wednesday night, bad things are going to happen. They happen in every hockey game. Good teams just sort of shrug them off, regain momentum, and get back after you or stabilize things. Win or lose, it's a game. Now, what happens Wednesday when bad things happen to the Penguins? Can a couple of up-tempo practices erase the crushing defeats that they've been suffering? And Nedeljkovic alluded to that when he said, we can't keep putting out there what we've been putting out there. He's absolutely right. Good Lord. I don't think I've seen a Penguins team, get just crushed like this. I don't even remember it with the Gen X team. Gen Next, Gen X, whatever it was called. Those guys weren't very good, and those guys got carpet bombed more than once. But I don't recall them quitting or just completely packing it in. History can sometimes, I guess, tend to erase those things. But this team is far too good for that. And so something does have to give. Kyle Dubas has to do a lot more than Philip Tomasino. He has to add some defensive help or add some scoring help. He has to change the complexion of the locker room in some way, shape, or form that allows the guys to have a little bit of optimism and hope. If he doesn't do that, it's highly likely the Penguins are going to get just bombed again and again. It becomes a spiral. One begets another, and so on and so forth. And that's why the Penguins are 7-12-4. 7 wins in 23 games. You might have thought they were bad. They weren't supposed to be this bad. They were actually supposed to be competitive. And so for all of those reasons I just laid out, you want a good environment for the kids. You need to keep the fans somewhat happy and interested, because you don't want attendance dropping to 12,000, 11,000 a game because fans don't believe you care. I wrote that on Saturday, that Kyle Dubas and FSG have to speak directly to the fans, but they can't do it on their team channels. They've got to face us. They've got to come to the table with the media and let us just have at it. Ask the real questions. Let's go. Let's do this. What is the plan? Because this dual track surely isn't working. This stay competitive and retool is absolutely not working. Are you willing to take some of the resources you've acquired for the future, reinvest them into this team that needs help now? Or are they on their own? And if they are on their own, if there's no help coming and they are this bad, does that not indicate an absolute teardown? That's kind of the interesting thing, is because they wouldn't tear it down, they're getting the same results. That's the interesting part of this whole situation. They didn't want to trade away a lot of the veteran players because they didn't want to stink. And yet, here we are. We're having long conversations in the locker room. So let me kind of put a bow on this with why I'm glad I held the podcast Monday afternoon. After talking with Nedeljkovic, I did have a little bit of sense of optimism that he wasn't shoveling piles of manure my way. The guys actually believe, they look around the locker room and they're like, okay, that sucked. We can figure this out. We're going to get out of this. Whether or not they can is an entirely different matter. And that's why Sullivan, while he spoke confidently and while he clearly was a little bit in a lighthearted frame of mood or lighthearted frame of mind on Monday, he was even laughing in the press conference. He cracked himself up, making a joke at Seth Rohrbaugh's expense. Mike and Seth have a very playful back and forth because Seth leads off every press conference every day with housekeeping question. And it's become just a running thing amongst all of us. Okay, Seth gets the first question. Seth Rohrbaugh, of course, of the Pittsburgh Tribune Review. And Seth asked, the kind of the detailed questions before we all get to hockey, and Seth joins in that. Please don't, don't misunderstand that I'm in any way disparaging or downplaying Seth's contributions. No, far from it. I'm just saying Seth leads off every day with the details question. And Seth today noticed that Blake Lizotte had a tinted visor. That seemed to amuse Mike Sullivan, because later on when someone else asked about Kevin Hayes, Sullivan said, well, I don't know if you've noticed, in the third period, we moved Hazy to center. Seth, did you notice that? And then Sullivan, he cracked himself up. So given the tenor and the tone, clearly there may have been some conversations Sunday, some reaffirmations or whatever happened, that Sullivan can relax and breathe easier and kind of get back to the basics with this team. Of course, all of that's well and good until losses continue to mount, and then we're right back to where we were, I think, Sunday morning when I was watching Twitter, wondering, waiting. If it didn't happen Sunday, Monday, it's not going to happen for quite a while. That puts the onus back on Kyle Dubas. If Mike Sullivan is staying, and because it didn't happen Sunday or Monday, if then else, then Kyle Dubas has to make some legitimate changes. Because this team deserves, if they're going to stay together, and the organization has allowed it, has signed them, has committed to it, so the organization is just as culpable as any player who wanted to stay. Hey, the organization had the final say. Just because Sidney Crosby said, I want Evgeny Malkin, didn't mean the organization had to do it. Just because Sidney Crosby said, I want Chris Letang, didn't mean the organization had to do it. A lot of players told Tampa Bay management, we want Steve Stamkos. Didn't happen, did it? No, Stamkos went to Nashville. So the organization, as much as some of you want to blame Sidney Crosby or, kind of get on them for staying together, that was the organization's choice. That was ownership's choice. That wasn't the players'. That was the players' ask. If your kid asks for a beer at 10 o'clock at night before they go to bed, are you going to give it to them? No, you can say no to things. But once you do, now you're kind of responsible. I don't know where that analogy came from, but maybe it's apropos. Okay, so that was a lot longer than I expected to do this here little podcast. In fact, as I'm talking, I see I have a text from Francis Anzalone. Oh, look at that. It's kind of funny. He just said exactly what I just told you. I'll read Francis's text. I don't think he'd mind. It says, Sullivan isn't going anywhere. It's clear after his presser today. Yep. Again, it can change. Things continue to change and evolve. And Philip Tomasino should be the first of several moves. Clearly, the blue line needs significant help. But I'm going to stop there. I think, we kind of have a weird schedule this week because Thanksgiving on Thursday, game on Wednesday. I'll decide if we do the live chat Wednesday because nothing's going to change between today and Wednesday unless the Penguins do begin to make those significant moves. So you might only get this podcast and maybe I'll do one Thursday from the airport. That might be something I do. Yes, I love when I get messages or notes from like high school kids who want to become a sports writer or want to get into the business. And then I tell them what I do every day. And then I say, oh, do you like your family? Say goodbye to them. You're not going to see them. I mean, I'm on a plane Thursday. I have to be at the airport like Thursday at noon. Because there were 2 flights to Boston that were nonstop, unless I wanted to fly to like Detroit and sit for 2 hours and then fly to Boston and get in at 11 o'clock at night after a 6-hour journey. I was like, no. So I leave at noon on Thursday. That's Thanksgiving. That's the life in the words of Hyman Roth, that's the life we've chosen. I do kind of enjoy it, by the way. And I love these podcasts, too. I think you and I talking these things out has morphed my writing a little bit. I think I've gotten into some topics that I might not have otherwise broached, or just the process of talking all of this out with you has expanded my field of vision. Maybe we'll do a Q&A, a podcast Q&A. I kind of like the sound of that. That's it. I'm done. I said it before. Now this time is for real. I thank you all. Make sure you subscribe and you do all those things so you get these podcasts downloaded automatically. And, I get paid. I appreciate y'all. Have fun.